our paths basically first crossed, probably without you even knowing it, when I heard you interviewing the original person behind the show, Lie to Me.
Right.
And that was
Yeah.
Dr. Ekman.
Paul Ekman.
Yes. And I was a longtime fan of the show. So tell me a bit about. Let's just dive into, and then we'll come back to that story about curiosity. If you could just, for people listening now and want to know, why is curiosity important? If you had to pick sort of a couple of things that you need curiosity because, fill in the blanks.
Well, I think you got to start with what is curiosity, because so many people define it differently. And a lot of people think it might be just asking questions or exploring new things, or getting into trouble because you're exploring new things. I mean, there's negative connotations for some people, but it's, in my way of looking at curiosity and what I researched, curiosity is about getting out of status quo thinking. It's about not doing things just because they were done that way in the past. And I think that we get a lot of that in the workplace. We get stuck. And it's so important to develop that sense of getting out of status quo, because we get companies like Kodak's and Blockbusters and so many others where they just, that things worked for them in the past. They go, let's just do that again because it was so wonderful. But when everybody else starts to advance and they don't, then you have problems. So developing curiosity is key to improving engagement, innovation, motivation, drive, communication. You name anything that they're trying to fix in the workplace, it comes back to fixing curiosity. And it's really an interesting topic to look at, because when I first started researching it, I did a Google search just to have it notify me anytime there was research out there. And I almost got nothing at the beginning, even though I had to do minus Mars and rover and all that. I was getting a lot of that at first. But once you got rid of that, there really wasn't a lot written about it. And I think it's probably, some of the reason is because a lot of people use different words for it. Some people confuse it with creativity or motivation or other aspects. And yes, but since I've written my books and written my assessments and all that, I've noticed that it's ticked up dramatically. So I love to see podcasts like this one where you're out there promoting curiosity, because I think it's so important.
And I just want to say, for people listening, yes, there's so much information about you. So instead of going through your whole bio, I want people to definitely, we'll be putting some connections and links in there. But I do want to say that you, just for a scene setter, your background, you have written books, you have your PhD in the area of, now I'd like to hear that story for people maybe to understand a little bit about context around where you came from, because you also, it seems, links curiosity to things like emotional intelligence as well. So can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on emotional intelligence and its impact on performance. And I looked at sales professionals and took a look at that relationship. And it very much got me interested in assessing things. I hadn't really been certified to do any of these emotional intelligence or DISC or Myers-Briggs and all the different things I ended up being interested in later and becoming certified. So it was a really important discovery. It's so funny how I fell into it, Gail. I was on the phone with my professor, who I had for about 10 minutes, this guy, because he was a nut job. And I was talking to him, and it was the class you take long before you write your dissertation. It's when you're trying to pick your topic. And I thought, well, I thought it would be interesting to look at sales performance. And he heard me say, oh, sales performance and emotional intelligence is such a great idea. He thought I said that. And I didn't even know what that was. It was so long ago, right? It was before it became ever ubiquitous. Everybody knows it now, but back then. And I was very interested in that. I probably dropped this guy because he was a horrible professor, but I wish I could remember his name, because I kind of like to thank him for that part. But that's the only professor I've ever dropped in my entire life, and he's the one who changed my trajectory, which is kind of funny. But I started to look into it and read, of course, all of Daniel Goleman's work and Baron and all the different authors, and I found it so important that emotional intelligence has, the self-assessment and understanding others as well as yourself, right? And understanding emotions. And a big part of emotional intelligence is empathy, building that sense that I could put myself in your position, Gail, and understand your emotions as I'm talking to you. But how do I do that if I don't ask you questions? And if I'm not asking questions, if I'm not curious enough to delve into what makes you tick and why you're making this decision, especially in sales or any kind of, thing where you're having interactions with customers, that is critical. And so it definitely tied into curiosity. Loved having Daniel Goleman on my show, got to talk to him about all this. And he talked about curiosity being a key performance indicator of the future, that it was so critical to know this. So I think that there's a lot of behaviors that tie together. This all tied in later when I wrote about perception. I looked at perception as IQ, EQ, emotional quotient, CQ, curiosity quotient, and CQ, cultural quotient. So curiosity ties into perception, ties into emotional intelligence. It basically, I look at it like when I try to explain it to groups, I'll say, okay, you think you want to bake a cake, right? And you've got all these ingredients, and your outcome you want is cake. That's your goal. Well, you mix your ingredients together, you put it in the pan, you put it in the oven, you want cake. But if you don't turn on the oven, you don't get cake. You get something not useful, right? So that's the same kind of thing that happens in the workplace. Our cake is productivity, financial success. And they know they need motivation and engagement and innovation, all these ingredients. They mix them together and they put it in the oven, so to speak, but nobody's turning on the oven. And without turning on the oven, you get, a problem. So the oven, the spark is curiosity. And so we really need to work on that. So curiosity is the spark to, empathy, a big part of emotional intelligence. And so all these things keep coming back. And no matter who I've had on my show, doesn't matter if they're a motivation expert, emotional intelligence expert, doesn't matter. I ask them, what comes first? And they always say curiosity comes first.
One of the things I love about your cake analogy is I often say wishing and wanting don't make it so, because unless you're willing to do that extra work and dig deeper. And as I mentioned at the start, my 3-step process is right here. I'm always getting this right. So sign up, suit up, and show up. And that first step is signing up. And that is all around mindset. And one of the things I really liked about your work and reading about what you're doing is that idea of, how the mind works, the power of the mind. And it really does start with that work here, right? So because if you don't have that desire to, get that cake in the oven, it's just gonna sit there, right? In the big block.
It is such an interesting thing to look at how much the mindset impacts it. Of course, I researched Carol Dweck's work of, having the fixed or growth mindset. But a lot of it to me was what's stopping it and how can we fix this? And, there were so many assessments out there that do things in other realms, but in curiosity, all the assessments told you were if you had high or low levels, and that's important, but you also need to know what's stopping you. And that's what I created, what stops you so you can move forward. And so how it ties into your brain and mindset and all these things, it's been really great to talk about with some experts on the show. I just had Steve White on, who does a lot of work out of Dallas. He was talking about neuroplasticity and how, our brain's always making all these new connections. And, we're trying to look at how we can make our mind want to turn on to go and make sure that the oven's on and all these things, right? Because when you're curious, you spark dopamine and then you feel better. It's connected to just wellness and health. It's connected to so many positive things. And a lot of people shut down, and I know we'll talk about it later, reasons why, but that's so critical to recognize, because if we have this workplace that we're losing 550 billion a year due to low engagement, or tens of billions or more due to low emotional intelligence or communication and all these issues, it's everybody's mixing all these ingredients together, but they're not getting their cake because nobody's focusing in the right area. And if we could focus in that area, people would be so much more happy to sign up, suit up, and show up. You know what I mean? It's something that it wouldn't seem. It's like when you do something you love, it doesn't seem, when you do a job you love, it doesn't feel like you work a day and all that. Whatever that saying is, you'll never work a day in your life and all that. But it is like that because I think a lot of people have talked themselves out of so many things because of past experiences and so much. And so there's the mental aspect of what we tell ourselves, but there's also the positive things we can do to change that and build that neuroplasticity and get that dopamine and feel better, because everybody's born with curiosity. We all have it. I mean, birds going around a bush are going to run out of berries if they're not curious enough to go look at another bush. We need that. It's innate, but we lose it as we get older. Around age 5, 6, it just starts to plummet. And that was what I found so interesting. It's like, okay, so we have it and we're losing it. I want to get it back. And that's what I think is critical.
You know what? That is phenomenal. I don't know if you ever listened to the podcast Hidden Brain, but there's if you don't, you might like it, because there was an episode on there where they were talking about, I think it was that show where they're talking about, why is it that we do lose this sense of curiosity? And of course, people have been doing studies about so many things. And of course, when you're like us and are curious, we're always like digging around as to, okay, why is that? Why did that happen? And what
did they say for a reason? I'm curious if it's the same as my research.
Yeah, I'll have to, I'll go back.
Send it to me. I'd like to listen to it.
I'll see if I can find that one. I have a few favorite podcasts. That's in the one, of course, it had brain in it, and it's all about, why and how and our memory and just so many things on there that, and for people listening and watching, I'd like them to, we'll put a link to your show, because you have interviewed some phenomenal people. You've been on the stage with, some very well-known people. So I do want people to direct people to go listen to some of those shows. I've listened to a couple of yours, which were fascinating in terms of, the most recent one was the person who was the billionaire, right? And he was from India, and how he was talking a lot about, he talked a lot about mindset, which I'm also fascinated by too, and deciding, what is it you want to do. And
that's probably Naveen. Naveen Jain, he's an interesting guy. I've had a lot of billionaires on the show, which is, I find them fascinating. Remember, Naveen told me it was easier to run a $1 billion company than $1 million company, but I'll have to take his word for that one. But they're really fascinating, because you think we have these preconceived ideas of people, and then you get them on the show and you're like, okay, these guys are just normal guys. I mean, I remember asking Craig, there is a Craig from Craigslist, and I'm like, what do you like to do? And he was like, all interested in seeing the next Harrison Ford movie, just like anybody else, right? So you get these fascinating minds. I mean, Guy Kawasaki, Bethany McLean from, Enron, all her work. There's so many people that are so great. But when you have them on the show, it's so fascinating just to get different perspectives. I think I've interviewed, 1,500, 2,000 people on my show. I don't even know. And I do other shows as well. So, because I've interviewed for Global Mentor Network, I'm going to be interviewing for Leader next. And so a lot of these places now hire me to do their shows. And everybody I talk to, it's just endlessly fascinating to me. I think that's why I started my show to begin with, because I just wanted to, I had no desire to get anything from them. I didn't charge them. I didn't want their business. I just wanted to know their story. And a lot of them were waiting for me to sell them something, or, what do you want from, that was it. I just was curious, and I know a lot of people don't do it for that reason. They want to speak, or they want to get to their company and sell them something or whatever. But most of them really have very interesting insights, and I can't tell you how much I've learned every time. It's like teaching, I still teach for multiple universities, and every time I teach a class, I learn something. And every time I have a radio show, I learn something. I'm sure you probably do too from this. And it's wonderful.
Well, I do work, my niche, the so-called niche, is in manufacturing, but my show, it goes into a lot of different areas. And even though, like, you're not in manufacturing, but you have been connected because, okay, wait a minute, we're going to have to talk about that.
Well, I worked for 20 years for AstraZeneca, and they're a manufacturer. So
Yes.
yes,
Yes, you
I
worked
was
in
in
well,
sales. But
I have so many questions about that. That might be for a story for another day.
okay.
Working in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I did that 15 years in pharmaceuticals, and the rest was in agricultural chemicals. So yeah, I worked
Ah.
for two different divisions for AstraZeneca.
A lot of things that's the thing about manufacturing is that everything is kind of connected because
Mhm.
our cars, our, clothes, whatever, our food, everything usually leads back to some form of
Right.
manufacturing. And I specifically do my niche is within mold making. So it's really the people who make things that make things, right? Which
Yeah, that's
I
cool.
didn't even know there was. Like, you think about like those big plastic totes. Well, there's a tool that's made that they pour the
Yeah.
plastic in. So all those totes we used through the pandemic, and when you send, storage of stuff, all of our extra stuff all goes back to the tool makers that make the tools that before the plastic
No,
even gets
it's
poured
hard for
in.
me not to think about everybody who makes things when I'm in Las Vegas. You look around, you go, somebody had to make that.
Yes.
It's that fascinates me. Just
Yes.
how many things there are to look at there that had to be manufactured.
Well, that's cool. So you
Uh,
definitely do have an understanding. And,
oh yeah.
in talking about the mindset and getting the mind ready, there's lots of information. And then I want to jump now into, because this ties really nicely into the suit up, because the other thing that you do is the curiosity index, which I'm really interested in as well, because you mentioned that, a lot of the tests we take say, oh, well, this is who you are. And then I always go, okay, like there's one test I did. I'm a quick start, right? So that's me. I know one of the top things with me is like, I'm boom. I
Yeah.
like to get going on things. And
Yeah.
but I always say, okay, then so what? Okay, that's nice to know. But can you talk a little bit about how you came about creating the index and why it might be important for anybody listening? Because this really gets deep into how people can improve on in manufacturing right now. They're going to need to hire more people. There is a big need to hire also the right people. So over to you.
Well, as I started to write my book, Cracking the Curiosity Code, I started to write it because I had so many interesting people on the show. And I thought, oh, well, the really interesting, most interesting people were super curious. And I wanted to share that of what the importance of curiosity. And because I sometimes saw some of my students weren't as curious. They kind of just wanted me to give them the fish instead of teach them to fish. And I wanted them to have that desire to become curious. But as I was writing the book, I thought, well, I got to find the assessment that fixes this, just like an emotional intelligence test or an engagement survey or whatever it was out there. How can we fix this? Well, there wasn't anything. And I was very frustrated by that because I think it's great to know what your curiosity level is. But if that's the only assessments out there, what if you have a low level? And then what do you do? So I wanted something that was similar to how an engagement survey or emotional intelligence test tells you, here's your level, here's the things that hold you back, here's how you can move forward, here's how you build a plan, and so I hired all these people to help, and no, everybody kept giving me that same old assessment that told me about higher low level. I'm like, no, I don't want that. So I went back and I taught myself factor analysis and some of the things you needed to do it, because I knew how to ask the right questions. I worked with enough of these statisticians to get to that level. But the statistic part wasn't ever my favorite thing to do. And so I went back and it became much more interesting this time because there was a use for it, as compared to when you're in school and you're like, will I ever need this? Well, apparently you do. So I learned how to do it, and because I wanted a valid instrument. I didn't want something you just created and stuck on your website, and I wanted something I could put in a scholarly peer-reviewed journal, which I did, and I started out in LinkedIn, and I posted just beginning before I even started the assessment, just to get a tap on what people were thinking. And I said, what keeps you from asking questions in meetings, or something simple like that? And overwhelmingly, a lot of people came back with fear-based answers, which wasn't surprising at all to me. But so I continued on and I created a bunch of questions and studied thousands of people for years and got such interesting data back. And then I would rework the questions and ones that didn't work, ones that did work. And eventually I came up with my 36 question survey, which is the Curiosity Code Index, which determines the 4 factors that inhibit curiosity. And I was kind of surprised by a little bit of the results. The 4 factors are the acronym FATE, F-A-T-E. And the first one didn't surprise me at all, fear, because, nobody wants to look stupid in a meeting and ask a question. You want somebody, hey, Gail, why don't you ask it? So you look stupid. I don't want to ask it, right? And we all do that, right? It's kind of, oh. But the reason is the culture really in the organization and a lot of what we've experienced in the past and a lot of things impact our fear. And sometimes we don't ask questions because we don't want to make them look like they weren't clear or that we're questioning them about their competence or whatever. So there's a lot of fear-based things that went into it. And then the second factor of assumptions is really also tied into fear too, in some ways, is that we assume we're not going to like something. We assume it's going to be too hard. It's that voice in your head. I've taken it before. I'm not going to like it. Why do I need this? Oh, they're going to make me the head of this committee and not pay me if I say anything. Whatever it is you're telling yourself, we all have that voice. And a lot of times we just need to recognize that this voice is going on in our head. And I don't think a lot of times we do. And then the technology one was a surprise to me a little bit. I just hadn't really considered it. It makes sense now, but it's the over and underutilization of technology. I mean, think about it. If you were Einstein and I gave you a calculator, but I didn't tell you the math behind it, you never learned that part. You'd probably be the greatest calculator worker ever, but you would never maybe be Einstein, the mathematician that we need, right? We need both. So you have to get the background, the foundation, the math, or whatever it is behind whatever it is you're working on. It doesn't, if you don't work in math, you don't need the math, but I'm just if you have a software product, kind of the reasoning why we are using this product and what it's going to do for you and just the foundational stuff. And then once you have that calculator, you want to be the best you can with it, right? So there's a lot of things that we can have high tech and low tech days where we discover what we don't know about how things work. And then now that we have this thing, what can we do with it? So technology was a big factor. And then environment was big for me. You have family, you have friends, you have teachers, you have coworkers, your last boss, the current boss, anybody with whom you've had any contact is your environment. And, kids can be siblings. Hey, why would you do that? You'd be an idiot if you do that. Kids are stuff like that you get when you're young. And you want to go along with everybody because it's nice if okay, I'll do what you like. Or the teacher, you ask the question, they don't have time. They got 35 other kids. And then I think that's a big part of why when we enter school around that age, that the curiosity dips. Because there's so much that, there's teaching to the test. You've got unruly students you're trying to control. The teachers cannot just answer every single question. So there's a lot that goes into this. And I think recognizing those 4 factors and asking yourself, why don't I ask questions in meetings? And what am I telling myself that I'm not interested in? And how am I under and overutilizing technology? And who's told me what I cared about didn't really matter. And if you just look at those 4 things, of course, if they take the assessment, there's 36 big issues. But if you didn't want to take it and you want to get a kind of a general idea, that's kind of the direction that these things go. And then when they take the assessment, it's just like any other one. They get a 26-page PDF that gives them an outline of how to do kind of a personal SWOT analysis so you can overcome your weaknesses and your threats and create SMART goals to overcome these issues.
Oh, that's interesting. So after you take it, there's a guide that shows you how you can improve on it. That's very helpful because a lot of times you take these and then what, right? So
right. Well, that's like that original assessment. Well, then what if you're low, right?
Right.
So this will tell you this is your level in this part of fear or that part of fear or this part of technology, whatever it is. And it'll say, okay, so here's some examples of goals to overcome them. Here's some, ways to look at the kind of your weaknesses and your threats. And it does give you feedback of how to do this. And I go to organizations. I mean, I work with large organizations from everybody from Verizon to LinkedIn to Novartis to, a lot of different type industries. And when they take the Curiosity Code Index, depending on the group of who I'm training, usually the first half of the morning, we talk about, their individual results. We go over that. We explain what curiosity and why is important, all these kinds of things. And then we set up their SWOTs and their SMART goals. And then in the afternoon, the second half of the session, we'll go through how can we help the organization improve, like for innovation and engagement, now that you understand how these things are tied in. And I took a piece from what Disney did originally in their laundry division when they had a very poor, they had a lot of high turnover at the time, and thinking that they wouldn't get really anything interesting from people by asking, they asked anyway, like, how can we make your job better? Figuring, laundry's not fun and probably won't get that great of input, but instead they got great input. They got things like put an air conditioning vent over my desk, have my desk go up and down so my back doesn't hurt. And so when you go to the horse's mouth like that, it's such a huge impact. With you don't even realize such a simple thing could do that, and their turnover dramatically improved, saving them a lot of money. And so that is what we do when we train in the afternoon as well, because we're going to the horse's mouth, just like they did the employees, and we're saying, here, tell me the things that the company can do to improve curiosity, to improve innovation, engagement, whatever it is that leadership's trying to improve and that they think is important. And it's great because I train HR professionals, and I train lots of coaches and consultants to be certified in this. And then so if they're giving the assessment, or if the HR person, or if I'm giving it, I have this report now that we've whiteboarded all this great stuff, and you can give back to leaders and go, hey, look, all your answers are here. Just take them, And so that's a wonderful thing, because I think too many people just don't do the simple thing by going to them and finding out why. So it's a real fun thing, because their light bulbs go off in their head, and we get a lot of great discussions from it.
You know what I love about that is that a lot of times the answer is so simple and it's right in front of us. And, I work with clients, in manufacturing and working with getting them to show up more on social media. And I'm looking at these four, I left them up on the screen because this applies a lot of times to what holds people back. And this is right across the board. It's fear. A lot of times it's like, because the unknown, right? Of, well, if I post something, they don't know where to start. But then there's assumptions. Oh, people will think I'm bragging, or people think I'm too much. And then the technology, for sure, just the technology aspect of, logging on, and then environment. Yeah. I mean, if your background is such that you've been, people have commented on things like I often get, my brand is Gail Now, and I've got teased about it for a while, but it's not in a bad way. Like, it's because I said, well, people remember it, and, it has part of my name in it. And, it depends how you take that environment, right? Is it teasing, and is it bad teasing? But I always say, if you're getting teased, you're sometimes doing something right.
They care enough. No news is not always good news in this business. You want people to care enough to make comments, I think,
Yes.
And, but I agree with you. I think those are such critical things that we need in the workplace that can be really simple.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just the word curiosity at the beginning. How do you define it? What are we talking about? Some of the stuff just needs to be ironed out first. But it has to be in the core values, and the leaders have to really embrace this. And, and I love that some of the companies I've called on, when I went back to Verizon in New York, they did these videos of me where I talked a little bit about the value of curiosity for a couple of minutes, but then they would take a couple of their heavy, really successful people who have come back from some issue, or they've succeeded for whatever reason because of curiosity, and they share their story. And so maybe 2 minutes of me, 3 minutes of them, they put these little videos together, and they put it in all their stores and all their onboarding, to show that we embrace curiosity. Look, this is why we think it's important from what I said, and look at how it worked from what this person said, right? Yeah. And so that's really important that a lot of companies do. When I work with Novartis, they had Curiosity Month, where they'd bring in people like me and hundreds of others, and we'd have these, little webinars and different things we did all month long. And they rewarded people for 100 hours of training each year for free. They did different things where they'd have them employees would give their own little lectures if they wanted to do that, because there's no better way to learn something than to teach it, right? So they'd get them to get excited and share something that they liked with other people, so everybody learned. And so there's companies that just do that really well. They get it in their culture of embracing curiosity. You just have to recognize that it's not always just asking questions. It's not a lot of the problem I see, or companies or people will stick within their cubicle or their silos, or even their organization or their industry. And some of the best stories I talk about and write about are from companies where they looked outside of their industry to somebody else and some other company to see what they did to be successful. There's a hybrid bike manufacturer. Their bikes were breaking and they were mailing them in the mail, and they just kept losing all this money from all this, but they didn't have money to double their package size. They wanted to do something inexpensive and not have all their bikes break. And they decided to look at what else shipped in the similar container. And they looked at flat screen TVs were shipping in the same exact container. The only difference was it had a flat screen TV picture on it. And so they thought, let's throw a couple pennies out there, draw a flat screen TV picture on our box, see what happens. Well, their boxes didn't break nearly as much, right? Because they're more careful because they think there's a flat screen in it. And they continue to do that. And, that wasn't something that they looked at their competition necessarily. It's outside their industry. I've seen, hospitals bring in Formula One race car teams to improve their efficiency. I mean, there's all these ways we could find to look outside of our norm.
That's interesting because I am in manufacturing, but my background is as a journalist. And one of the things I said I bring is that because I don't know a lot about this industry, like I've had to learn about it. So I'm always coming in with those fresh eyes and asking the questions. And one of the biggest things, and this is where I think curiosity is so vital, is that a lot of times when I'm working with a client, they don't think their story is important. They don't think it's interesting. And it's those outside eyes, because again, it's so simple. They're like, well, this is what we do. And I'll say, okay, what's the question that you always get asked from a client or a prospect? I said, that's a great video or a post to do, because if you're getting asked this time and time again, right, you can now post it and someone's going to come along and go, oh my God, they've answered, they have the solution. And they think it's kind of, oh, they must know something, that I don't know.
Right. Well, it's so interesting to, as you said that, I think about how many times still when I talk, a lot of people haven't even heard emotional intelligence yet, and it's very much everywhere I go with people I deal with, usually, because they're in that realm. But if they're not or if they haven't had to have that exposure, it's natural they wouldn't know certain things, right? Mm-hmm. And as they say, you don't know what you don't know, but sometimes you don't know what they don't know. And and so I think it's always best to simple things, make it as simple as possible for everybody without talking down to people, because even the people who should know certain things maybe don't know it to the level that you think they do, right? And so I mean, even when I talk to anybody, I start off with, this is what I mean by curiosity, or this is what I mean by emotional intelligence, ability to understand your own emotions as well as those in others. And maybe they've heard emotional intelligence a million times, but they don't really know what it means, or you know what I mean? And so all this, when you're interacting with other people, part of the curiosity is asking yourself, what does this person know about this topic that, maybe they don't know? And it's without insulting people. I think a lot of people are afraid that they're going to ask questions that are going to make people feel like they're questioning their authority. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's how you ask questions or how you present information if you're giving information. And so I get asked this a lot because I speak at, for Forbes and different people all the time. And a lot of the questions that come in are, how can I ask a question without them thinking I'm questioning them? And a lot of it's just buffering, Gail, hey, I'd like to ask you a question because I'm trying to develop my curiosity. and I hope you don't think this sounds stupid, but, or whatever.
Mhm.
Now I'm not saying, hey, Gail, what you said made no sense. But why'd you say that? Some of that comes out of that. And it makes it much more approachable for people. And I think people appreciate it more. They're not, the people you're asking the questions of aren't thinking that you're questioning their knowledge. You're trying to do it for yourself.
Yeah, and I think I've worked with people on that, as well as getting, it's not what you ask them, it's how you ask it. And it's important to when you're asking questions as well, that I always said it's not necessarily about being nosy. It's really about, listen, can you help me understand this? And this is one thing I learned in all my years as a reporter, is I would say to people, because sometimes I'd go to interview someone who was an expert and they'd be talking and I'd be like, I have no idea what they just said. So sometimes I'd say, I have no idea what you said. Can you help me? Can you say this again? They go, oh yeah, no problem. And then they would give me this great answer. So instead of me taking what they said and trying to decipher, I just say to them, can you tell me, as if you're talking to someone that knows nothing about this? And no one was ever offended. In fact, they were so glad that I didn't, because they're like, oh, thank you. And that's one thing that I still tell stories. When I got into mold making, took me a while to figure out the difference between a mold maker and a molder. And I got them kind of mixed up for the longest while. Now I know the difference, but I was working with someone and I'd see the end result, but those were just those were the items that they had as samples almost, right? So, but it was all part of that growth trajectory. And I still work with that person. And, that's part of that fear. You have to get over the fear of being wrong, of making a mistake. Right. And so in terms of, using that, and when you've talked to people, I love too, that when you were, of all the different people you've interviewed and you've talked about this, that the most successful people are curious. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can talk a little bit about defining success, because I'm extremely curious. And, even though, I'm not a billionaire, but I consider myself quite a pretty happy person, because I found a way to, because of curiosity, to often let go of judgment. I'm not perfect, but generally I find when I can let go of that and go, oh, that person thinks differently. Mm-hmm. That's okay. I don't have to convince them. We can share in this bubble, the concentric circles. Here's what we agree. Yeah. So maybe if you could talk about that, about the definition of success and curiosity.
Well, I like that you said that. I think we have more things in common than we even recognize with people, and it's finding those commonalities. I think some of the best training I've ever had in my life I got from having to work in sales for so many decades. Mm-hmm. And it's too bad everybody doesn't have some kind of a sales background, because it's humbling, but it helps you learn to ask questions, to learn more about other people. And it's just, there's so much to it. Now, I want to make sure I answer your question exactly. What did you want me to tie into there?
How do you think curiosity can lead to success? How do you use curiosity, whether for hiring, whether for selling, is there just a way, from all of the interviews you've done, has there been that kind of, as you're talking to people?
I think curiosity just crosses all areas, because, if you're in sales, of course, you build that empathy, you find out what they want, and you can target whatever they need. You're not wasting time. So your productivity becomes dramatically improved because of that. I had a guy on my show that had that dealt with curiosity at Stanford. Barry Ryan taught just a sales and curiosity course there, and so he was fun to have on the show to talk about that. But you don't have to be in sales. It doesn't matter what your job is. I think you're building. Think about how much it would impact engagement alone. If you're in a job where you're not really loving what you do and you're just kind of showing up to work, and if you were curious enough to ask more questions, to explore different areas, you might get some job responsibilities that are more aligned with what you really love to do. I mean, there's assumptions made out there that everybody hates paperwork, or everybody loves this, or I love paperwork. I'm the weirdest person out there, right? I used to just live for my doing my expense report, and then people would think I was insane. but everybody, there's something for everybody, right? And so when I led, I was the MBA program chair at the Forbes School of Business, and when I was leading the people there, I remember just some were really great at running like a forum where they would deal with faculty and they would help them, and others were really great at doing credit hour analysis and the more technical stuff. And then you didn't necessarily force the credit hour analysis on the person who loved to be in front. There was ways to make everybody happy. But if I didn't know that and look into that and question that, I think sometimes we force job responsibilities on people, and we don't. The worst thing is that they're really good at something and we don't look into it, and they could be the best at this and we don't even try it with them. I had Olin Otakoven, who recently died. He was a great leader. He was the head of Peregrine, was on my show, but I've interviewed him several times, and I work on the board with him, with Steve Forbes and a bunch of other people. He's been he was a guy who would hire people and then build entire jobs around what he thought they were good at. He didn't even know what he was hiring them for at the beginning. Now, I think that would be an expensive thing for a lot of companies to do, but he really found it was effective to find out what they were really good at. And it's hard to know what people do just from the interview. I remember when I interviewed Ken Fisher of Fisher Investments, another really smart, curious billionaire guy, that I was talking to him about the interview process. And he says, people, they'll tell you what they can do, but you don't know what they will do, right?
That is so true.
Yeah. I mean, how much can you know in the interview process? And that's why I look for curious people in that realm. If they're not asking me questions about my company, if they don't know, they haven't demonstrated that they know what products I have coming out, or what R&D is working on, or whatever it is in the industry, I feel like they're just going to be telling me what they can do and not what they will do. And if they come in asking questions and being interested, then I feel like I'm going to get more of what they will do, because they've shown they're doing something now.
For anyone in HR, listen to that. That is so valuable, what you just said, Diane, in terms of, the can do versus will do, because one of the things I was very blessed to work with a company with the owner exceptionally. They were very successful, and his philosophy was to, when you find someone, put them in, and then you can train them. And when he hired me, I had no real, managerial background, and I was overseeing an advertising and promotions department that went from 2 people to 10 people, and one of the things he did was he saw that I was I can figure stuff out. Just leave me, but stay out of my way. Let me come to you when I need help. Right. And that is, and then from there, I worked with HR people who were phenomenal as well. And that's really helpful tip as well, to get curious about your staff and find out if you're going to have success, it's good to know what they love doing. And I always said 80-20. If 80% of the time you love what you're doing, and then 20% can be where you don't like it. It's when that number gets out of whack. And in all of my jobs, I would say that's my success period, was at 80-20. And as soon as it ever got out of you're not going to be happy.
I think that, I can remember in pharmaceutical sales, my favorite thing was being on computers and things that really weren't aligned really well to being in a position where you're driving all day, and all that stuff I wasn't crazy about. And I remember sitting around the table, and everybody was talking about their favorite parts of the job, and almost everybody said they loved to drive. And that was by far the thing I hated the most. And I'm like, because I knew I wasn't really aligned to doing that. I loved the company, but I really didn't want to drive all day. My original position in the company was in an office, and I loved that. And I think it's just recognizing what works for you. And at the time it worked really well for me because my kids were young and I had more flexibility. But now everything's flexible to some extent, and things have changed, and we don't stay in companies 20 years like we did. And things it's a different time, and we have that ability to go, do I really want to do this? And is this what's really making me happy? because there's a lot more options now.
Yes, there's definitely more flexibility, which is good. And the other thing I liked what you talked about was the idea of that from the empathy perspective. Not only, what are you thinking, but what's the other person, and that is such a big issue of that gets overlooked, right? We don't always look at what the other person may be thinking or feeling, and I see that working especially in. And I'm going to be talking in future shows, really interviewing some people to try to hear some of those other voices that maybe also don't get as much time on mainstream media as well, because that's a big topic right now. Is that because I always said, if you suppress something, it's going to come out in some other way. Just ask the questions and find out what's going on.
Well, it's true, and I think that this is a time like no other time. And when I work with all the companies, you hear some of the stuff that they want out of employees and how times are changing. What's interesting to me is I interviewed a lot of the CHROs for big Fortune 500 companies for the Global Mentor Network, GMN.net. And when I was doing a lot of those interviews, what I found really interesting when talking to the CHROs was how much employees now are kind of telling you what they want more than what the employer is saying, here's your job. Now they're going, no, I'll come to you if I get this and that. And the tables have kind of turned. And it's going to be a different time for what control employers have and what people want or what they're willing to put up with. And there's never a time to have empathy more than now, because you can from both sides see, okay, you want this, and we normally don't give that. So where can we meet in this position so everybody's happy?
Right.
So it all comes back to empathy and emotional intelligence and curiosity.
Yes. And because it's going to probably grow. These problems will grow unless we can sort of find a way to say, let's get curious and understand, why is someone doing that? Why does someone believe in this view? Right. And I always said, you don't have to agree with it, but can you just let them have that? Because as soon as I always say, if you just tell someone like you're wrong and get into name calling, then there's it's a lot harder.
Tough. If you get a core culture like that, it's really tough to change it. You can't from the bottom up, and we talk about this in all the leadership courses I teach. It's just it's something that leaders who are listening to this have to recognize their core values of how they share them and how they show up. If you're a leader and you want to embrace curiosity as a core cultural value, you have to demonstrate that you're curious and that you're willing to ask the stupid questions that you would consider stupid. Of course, no question's stupid, but in your mind, there might be, right? And so we have to see, this is what we want to do for our company. This is how we're going to change things. You decide that you're going to make the change. You assess everybody to see where their levels, what's holding them back, I should say. And then you create a plan to move forward, implement it with strategies like the things I mentioned with paid training, videos and onboarding, or whatever you're going to do to showcase that this is critical. Because anybody I've interviewed that deals with core values and that type of thing, I'm thinking of like Dina Dwyer Owens was on my show, and she wrote Values Inc. She said that every meeting, every time, if they had something they were talking about, they discussed always, does this tie into our core values and how does it? And that's something to talk about in the meetings. If your core value is one of them is curiosity, how are we using this to develop that?
Yeah, no, that really dovetails well into that, what I talk about in terms of showing up, right? Because if you're going to show up and utilize curiosity, a big part of it is, yes, as we talked about, getting those tools, making sure you understand the why and how are you going to make changes, whether in your workplace, whether in staffing, and even personal relationships, right? I found that sometimes if there's a problem, if you go ask why, can you tell me more about this? And this just happened to me recently it was more work related, but I put forward this proposal and I got a kind of a short note back saying, yeah, no, we're not doing this right now. And I was like, wow, that seemed like it was a really reasonable. Anyways, we talked. I found out it wasn't, because I thought, was it about money? Was it? And I
Huh?
genuinely was curious. It wasn't so much
Huh?
that I'm like, oh,
Have to do
I'm
this.
mad.
Yeah.
I just was,
Uh-huh.
I, and I said to her, I'm so glad we spoke, because it was totally unrelated. We had a very good conversation. It's just, and we sometimes, this is a big problem. We assume someone's intent, and it's complete. And as a parent, and I guess you have 2 children, right? Two
Yes.
grown
2
daughters.
daughters. Mm-hmm.
And one thing I've learned is, some things you can't even figure out why they do or say things.
Oh, mine are at least past that teenage years. I'm past the worst of that. But yes, I know what you're saying. It's, I think what you brought up is so important, because I addressed that a lot in the perception book. But the dean at the Forbes School of Business and Technology and I wrote The Power of Perception. And a lot of that dealt with, trying to recognize that you sit in this position in this planet, and no one else actually sits exactly where you sit, right? No one's going to see things exactly the way you do. Mm-hmm. And you have to work in a global environment where there's a process, and the acronym for that was EPIC, and it's evaluate, predict, interpret, and correlate to come up with your conclusions, right? And so all those things are impacted by our culture, our curiosity, all these things. And so I think that a lot of people would just, a lot of people call me and go, oh, look at this email, look at what they said. And I read it, and it sounds absolutely fine to me, but then they read it to me in this real snarky voice, right? Oh, and I'm like, well, does this person usually have a snarky tone with you? Is that why you read it like that? Well, sometimes it is, and so that would impact it, and sometimes it's not, and that's how they would write something if they felt snarky, right? And so it's hard for people to get that empathy without sometimes getting an outside perspective. I remember Daniel Goleman mentioned that he thought 360 evaluations were really helpful to get outside perspectives. There's just so much that we need to learn about our position on this earth and how we react based on just everything that's impacted us from our, even people's cultural upbringing, could be their spirituality or their religion, to their male, female, gender, whatever it is, kind of things. And so it's so important that we have that freedom to ask questions of each other, to learn more about each other without putting people on the spot or making people feel uncomfortable. And a lot of it is how we ask.
Yes. I have had that happen with someone reading a text, and I'm like, and this has happened with employees, right? And they would read something back. They got, oh, I got this email from somebody. I'm like, okay. And they would go on and on about it. Then I would read the email and go, because I knew them, and I'd hear their voice completely differently. I'd be like, no, they're just asking, they're just efficient. How they write is differently. So I have learned, oh my God, emails are the worst ways to communicate if you don't know the person. And
it is. It's bad. I'm like you. I get right to the point, and then I go back and I put something nice at the beginning, because I'm getting my stuff out there, and then I go, oh, I forgot to say this nice thing, and I got to put it in.
I do. And you can do that in a hurry, right? When you're with someone but someone that's business. I do the same thing. I go back and go, I better soften a bit, because I don't mean it to be harsh. I'm more,
you don't. You're just getting your thoughts out, right? But for somebody who's very sensitive, and they read something like that, and they've had somebody be mean to them or something in the past, they could assume that. And it's a very tough time. One of the first classes I used to teach was netiquette. Which was, etiquette for internet and classes, so that was part of what they had to learn, was not to write in all caps, or, because that's yelling or whatever it was. Right. We would go for all that stuff. And it helps to have people look at your stuff sometimes, especially if it's something really important. Can you read this? Does this come across any, negative way? That's something that I think a lot of people don't do enough of.
And when I'm coaching people, I sometimes will actually say, do you want me to let me take a look at it before you before you send it, right? Because I sometimes soften it a bit and make it so that it's easier for before
Right.
they send it out, right? So
Mhm.
wow. Well, I did want to get into, I know, a big part of curiosity is trying something different. And, I mentioned at the start, we have that in common with the scuba and zip lining. We've both tried those things and decided that, yeah, just so we have to keep
Oh,
doing it.
it's funny. I talked my husband into the zip line, actually both of those, but I was the one who really wanted to do the zip lining and he didn't. But then after we did it, he was like, that was great. I'm like, nope, not doing that one again.
I like the zip lining once I was out
Done.
flying through the air. I was
Oh,
going
uh-huh.
up and then standing before they push you off. That was what gave me, I'd probably
Oh,
do zip
really?
lining ahead of scuba diving for sure.
Scuba diving was not
Yeah.
my favorite, but I really wanted to see how hard it would be. I think, sometimes just pushing yourself a little bit. I think too many people exist instead of live, and they just want to do the same old thing, and then they're bored. And if you just find something new to do, and it doesn't have to be something scary like scuba diving or whatever. It could
Mhm.
be just, I take tap dance classes and I take different things, and I thought about a sculpture class recently or something, just something you've never thought of doing. Just do it. And it sometimes opens up some doors that you just never ever imagined because you think, it's like Steve Jobs taking calligraphy and now all the fonts are what they are because of it. And you just don't know where it's going to lead.
You know what? I love that because I was going to ask you about how exercise, or maybe at times, sometimes I think for people like us, it's almost like we need to take a break from our curious minds. Like, yes, like I like to read and listen to podcasts, but sometimes I like to do something that doesn't make
Yeah.
me think directly.
Well, I do hike a lot. I'm a big hiker. I have my yellow white Labrador at my feet, and she and I, Luna is her name, we go hiking. We just got back from Big Bear, and we're gone over 6 days. We hiked 30 miles, so she's a little tired right now. She's been good for the interview because of that. But we do a lot of hiking, and it helps me I think exercise is really critical. It helps with your dopamine as well.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'm a big multitasker. I know they tell you not to do it, but I tend to listen to things and do things, at the same time. I can do multiple things. But when I'm hiking, I don't usually. I mean, it's kind of peaceful out there. It kind of frees your mind, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I do cycling for that reason too. And I think it's interesting what you said too about the multitasking. Sometimes, people say, "Oh, well, they say they, right? They." Means
The
they
big day.
people. But
Uh-huh.
the other thing is we all are different. And that's where I embrace the curiosity, as that I know you do too after listening to your interviews, is that it's about leaning in and saying, oh, well, maybe just because, if they recommend, I've tried intermittent fasting, and I was like, I tried it a lot, and I'm like, and it was okay, but now I'm thinking, I don't know if I was eating enough. So now I'm going back to trying, okay, I'm going to space out eating again, and, try,
Yeah.
try something different.
I don't think there's a one size fits all on
No.
dieting or exercise or any of that stuff. I think you have to find what works for you. And my husband's a physician, so he has a lot of opinions on diet and exercise and stuff. And I don't follow any of the things he thinks are right, probably. And it works for me. But I think you got to try different things. And I like being curious and exploring. And he's very curious, and he learns a lot about different things. And I do learn a lot from him.
Wow. Well, there is so many more things we can talk about, but I do want to mention, that you have, and I'm going to put up, people can go to your website, drdianehamilton.com. There's also your book, Cracking the Curious Code. You have the Curious Code Index. You have a free course on your website as well, which I actually am planning on taking it. I started it, but I want to go finish that.
Good.
And here's all the things just for anybody that's watching, that you're a behavioral expert, author, speaker, consultant, and as I said, I have been fascinated from about you since I first heard you, and I continue after this interview to, also be inspired that I'm kind of on the right path for success as well. Because when you're, I often talk about this too in Ted Lasso. There's a great scene: be curious, not judgmental. And as I said, for future shows, I'll be actually bringing people on, and we're going to be talking about, some fun topics, some controversial topics, well, not controversial for everybody. That's the thing, right? When someone's like, oh, that's controversial. Well, no, not to some people. That's just quite normal, right? So,
Yeah.
So thank you, Diane. Is there anything else that I've missed, anything upcoming that you would like to mention?
There's so much I'm working on with Leader Next. It's going to be a really interesting company that I'm a co-founder with. That's similar to what Chief did for CEOs. It's more for CHROs. So I'm working on that. I work on a lot of boards. I work with the Kroc Institute out of Purdue, which is about improving awareness in the U.S. of becoming having power in the innovation, and so that we're leading the industries and innovation. So I get to work with Keith Kroc, who I've worked with for years, who was the CEO and chairman of DocuSign and undersecretary. So I continue to work with him and I was fortunate to win the Thinkers 50 Radar Award. So I'll be going to Thinkers 50 in November for the big event in London, which is the who's who of thinkers, which is a really fun event to go to. So you might want to check that out. And I continue to just do my normal speaking, teaching, and all my other stuff. But they can find out everything they need to know at Dr. Diane Hamilton that you put up.com. And it's very, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, just say you heard me on Gail's show, because I get a lot of requests and sometimes I don't know who they're from. So please tell me that.
And for anyone, the thing about social media too, showing up, commenting on, posts, and go listen to some shows first. I often tell people, before you reach out, I made sure before I go reach out to anybody, I read their posts, listen to some of their shows. So I'm not asking you the wrong questions. And I think that's another part of that, suiting up part, is doing your research. And, it's because there's no excuse for not getting information now. And the only thing would be make sure, I said, there's, consider the source too. And there's not only one place to get information. And it's a wild, wonderful world, because we have Google, we have Wikipedia, we have Twitter, which has I am a fan of Twitter. Not everybody, that can be controversial for some. I like it because there's a lot of different information there now. So, and I
use it a lot for marketing classes. It's a great marketing tool, especially during the Super Bowl.
Yes.
To watch trending things. There's all social media has different value, different reasons that I use it for different things. So I agree with you.
Yes. And that is key. It all depends. And what works for one. I always said too, it's like social media is like a knife. A knife can cut and hurt and injure, or a knife can, cut and be very useful. So you just have to decide what it is you want to use it for. So, okay, I'm just going to do my wrap up. I'm just going to have you go in the green room, and I'll be back.
Thanks, Gail. This was fun.
Okay, I'll be right there. Well, thanks everybody for watching and connecting today. If you're not following Dr. Diane Hamilton, I strongly encourage you to find her on, at her website, but also on LinkedIn, and listen to her shows. She has a radio show. She's interviewed phenomenal people. And if you're going to grow, and if you want to learn, and you want to expand on how to use curiosity for success, you definitely want to lean in and listen to what Diane has to share. And also stay tuned for future Curious Mind shows, because we're going to be getting very curious and leaning in to hear from people from all different walks of life, and maybe understand our world a bit better. Okay, thanks everybody. See you soon.